the clouds. So yeah, now we're starting basically the last session of the summer school. It's been an intensive 2 days, and I'd like to welcome our next lecturer and speaker from Netherlands. Unfortunately, he couldn't come to Perm, but next time maybe it could be an occasion. So Kasper Kupperman is the founder and the CEO of the Green Branch, which is the Dutch Brazilian startup, right, which is focusing on the restoration and climate projects, not just in Brazil, but maybe in other countries. You can explain. But yes, you're welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. So it's very nice to be here, although virtually. Thank you, Sergey, for inviting me. I have been introduced to Sergey through a common friend of ours from Sao Paulo. So that goes to show how worldwide this movement is, of people trying to connect with each other, trying to find new solutions for the problems that we face. And today I'm here to talk to you, and talk with you about how the Green Branch is contributing to this cause. So to introduce the company and myself, of course, a bit, I have a short presentation, also with some video and photos to give you a bit of to try to take you to Brazil with me. And after, of course, open for questions, discussions, and yeah, of course, curious on your take of things. So if I could, Sarah, could you allow me to share the screen?
Yes, I will make you an organizer.
Perfect. Is it visible at the moment?
We can see it. Yeah, we can see it.
Is it visible?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Perfect. The Zoom screen also, or is it not included?
The Zoom screen, we can see you and your desktop.
Okay. So this is probably better. So thank you all for having me. Really excited to talk. This is my first time talking in well, abroad actually. So first of all, we're talking about a huge problem here, and of course you've been you're all familiar with this. Probably for the last 3 days you've talked continuously about it, but it's always good to just repeat, because what we do is not only about capturing carbon from the atmosphere, although it's dangerous levels. This is a large part of it, but another big problem is that almost 65% and increasingly so of the world's sustainable land is degrading and desertifying. In Brazil, we see this lots of times. And it has been going on for hundreds of years since the people started to come there. The Atlantic forest, which we're trying to restore, has been reduced to, well, 25 or 30% of what it used to be, and it's highly fragmented. What we see now in the Amazon as well is what we call savannification, and after that comes desertification. So it's actually going back from forest to a worse and worse soil. And also to meet the Paris Agreement, the carbon market has to multiply by 150 times in the coming 10 years to be able to supply the market of carbon credits, and to be able to turn these investments into actual projects, into actual goals. So our solution to that is, of course, reforestation, to sequester carbon in the vegetation and the soil also, to make carbon credits as a means of financing these projects. So for us, there are a few things we take very seriously, and one of them is what we call biological integrity. which means that we're not going to sequester by planting a monoculture of pinus or eucalyptus, but that we really research the ecosystem and the biome to see what kind of trees grow out there, what species play a certain function in that ecosystem, and try to recreate that in order to get back to those ecological values that it used to have. And of course, to supply the corporate companies, big and small, sometimes even individuals, to supply them with the carbon credits that they need for their sustainability goals. So to summarize, what do we do? For us, it's important that the carbon model that we implement, the carbon farm, so to say, the forest, is a business model that is actually working for the farmers. They are still landowners of the land, and we are merely giving them the technical support and the financial incentives to be part of this carbon market. And of course, it is important that it is not only about carbon, but about building a forest that actually restores nature. And the important thing is that to be able to give a solution to this, you need to be compatible to certain other land use, such as extensive cattle grazing, which degrades the land even further. And lastly, we manage and monitor the project over project lifetime. So we do the measurements, we do the calculations, environmental impact assessments, stakeholder communication and engagement, to be sure that this project is actually working for the long term, and will be able to withstand the strains of time, so to say. As I was telling, it needs to work for the farmer most of all. What we experience in Brazil is that to them, climate change is so much realer than it is for most people here in Europe. For us, it seems so far away most of the time. Well, of course, this summer has been a summer of very extreme weather, of horrible things happening in the Netherlands as well. But to the farmers in Brazil, this is everyday reality. They see their yields decreasing over time. They see their harvests being disrupted by droughts and getting worse every year. So for them, the call to action, I think, is really in time, and a really good solution for them that they might have been waiting for as well. So before we go to the project, was wondering if there are any questions about what we do, any questions that interest you, or things that you notice.
Oh, well, yeah, not yet, but there will be.
Perfect. So to take you to Serra do Sudeste, this is the southern part of Brazil. So why have we chosen for the southern part of the Atlantic forest is because of two reasons. The first is being that the Atlantic forest is a real biodiversity hotspot. Because it stretches so long, it houses so much different species. And it's also very important a mechanism to get rain, humidity to come land inwards. And also it has been deforested a long time ago. So here there is not so much deforestation going on. Illegally, almost none anyways. And this is why for us it feels more logical to start restoring here, because it is not being cut down all the while. While in the Amazon, there's so much deforestation that it makes more sense to first put a stop to that and then start restoring again, because otherwise it will be a drop on a burning plate, so to say. So to be able to restore land in this biome, which is an ecotone, which means that it connects two biomes. It connects the Atlantic forest to the pampas. The pampas being the vast grasslands that we know from Uruguay, Argentina, but also parts of Brazil. And because it is two biomes overlapping, there's a lot of biodiversity and an important region to restore. So what we try to mimic is the way of the natural succession. So instead of planting trees in lines, so to say, we, as I told you, look at how would nature normally restore itself, and then try to find the right methods and the right seeds and seedlings to boost that. So here you see, starting with the grassland on the left, pioneers are coming. After that, secondary, primary species come, adding a new layer on the forest. And eventually, after 30 years, 50 years, we will see the climax species taking over, forming a roof over the forest, and adding to that layeredness of the forest. So here we see a pre-project photo. So we see here is bare soils, a little bit of growth around about river basins, and some cattle at the bottom. And here we have some photos of the actual planting. These are the amazing guys helping us planting manually. We also do things with planting machines to get large amounts of biodiverse seeds in the ground. And in the center, you see myself and my colleague Jacob sitting around the first seedling that was planted, which was, of course, a huge accomplishment for us. We've been working towards it for 2 years. So this was really, truly a great moment, which we've enjoyed a lot, and enjoyed working with these guys as well. On the right, you can see the seedlings being treated. When it's time to plant them, they get adjusted to the sun. They're being watered and eventually put in the ground. We also include some commercial species, but native species, so no eucalyptus or pinus, but local species that they, for example, can get nuts of, or in the future, some commercial trees. So when we look at the impact, it's 400 hectares almost. Everything we do, we do organically, so there's no chemicals. Over 33 species, which we're expanding to do more and more, and also really trying to look at the IUCN Red List to get species that are endangered. One species, the Araucaria, which is critically endangered, we're trying to reintroduce to the region, which is an amazing tree, and I will show one later on. And also, of course, make a habitat for all the wildlife that is living there. And of course, to be able to make sense to corporates, so to say, we try to translate as much as we can to Sustainable Development Goals, which we of course use as a language to communicate our sustainability efforts and our impact, of course. So another point for any questions.
Question, Kasper, what is the current duration of your project? Like, what is your timeline? Is it 20, 30 years? And also, what's going to happen after that, after the project ends?
Yeah. So our projects are a minimum of 30 years, and this is because this is one of the criteria for a VCS project. So VCS is the Verified Carbon Standard from Verra, American company, organization, I should say. And this is really important because, well, first of all, you need a forest to grow to maturity. Certain species are even growing far beyond that. The Araucaria that I told you about only matures at 50 and can reach 500 years old. But the really important question is exactly as Sergey put it, is about the permanence of the carbon stock. So what you want to create is a situation where you don't have to cut down the forest to get a revenue. So in the first couple of years, this will mostly be done by carbon compensation. We also try to find different models to add. So for instance, we try to add olives or coffee or coca or any other trees in small patches so that there's another revenue stream. But inside the forest, we plant a certain amount of commercial species that can not be harvested for 30 years. So you have to think about a really low number, about 20 or some patches, 40, also places where there are none, um, to be able to, after 30 years, work on a sustainable plan. So not cut everything down, but for example, cut down a few every year and then replant those at the same spot. So then you can keep the forest, but still get another source of revenue. And also by that time, I hope that the world has learned that a forest is worth more intact than it is worth cut down. So hopefully after those 30 years, we can extend the project timeline further.
And also, you mentioned that you have 1,000 hectares of, let's say, conserved, and then 400 was reforested. And is it all together as a part of the VCS, or you just only have the reforestation as a separate kind of certification? How do you do that?
So there's a difference between the project area and the reforestation area. The project area is the whole farm, because the agreements that we make about the sustainability of the farm, of the management of the farm, concern all the land. So for example, the forest that was already existed, of course, cannot be cut down, because otherwise we would not have a net positive effect. But also we removed cattle to be able to restore the land so it doesn't get trampled or eaten. And we introduced them on another farm where they are now part of a silvopastoral system in an acacia plantation. So when we look at the whole farm, we always try to think of everything so that there's no leakage and that that everything is run in a sustainable manner.
Okay, thank you.
So going forward to what is needed to actually develop and implement such a project. So I am an economist by trade, which for some people seems very far removed from reforestation and ecology. But actually it's two sides of the same coin, because the economy in some way has actually been derived from the ecology. Time that we first started to use the seasons to grow food was the first time that we really started to trade, and the economy started to be. So the economy has always needed ecology, and we really felt like at this point that the ecology really needs economy to support him. So from that idea, we started working, and then got in touch with a lot of really bright people from Wageningen University and from Brazil itself, of course, that have the knowledge of the agronomy, of forestry, and ecology, to make sure that we build some beautiful projects. So the business model is really simple when you think of it. We make a reforestation project. We certify it so that we can quantify the carbon credits and sell it. We also use other certification to be able to quantify social and environmental impact, which of course adds to the value of the project and of the value that you can sell those carbon credits for. And with that revenue, the farmer is compensated for the protection of the land and for working on the project. So how it looks within our organization is that there's first a research phase. We start with the acquisition, of course. We look for suitable projects, suitable biomes, suitable land. And what we do when we get to such land is do a three-way analysis. So the first is a farm system analysis. What is the historical use? What are the inputs and outputs? Is there intoxicated soils, for example? And what opportunities do we see to improve it, differentiate the income, let systems work together, or where do we see risks? What is dangerous for our projects? What is there Roundup in the ground, for example? Invasive species that have been introduced. So the next is the ecosystem valuation. Here we look at the biodiversity, so the species that grow there, but also at the soil structure, soil quality. Where do we have the rivers? How are things working together? Is there land degradation, erosion? And last but absolutely not least is the community and culture. So to be able to make these projects work, at the very heart of it are the people that live there, that are the landowners, the farmers, and that need to look after those projects. And from history, we've learned that projects where an organization would come in to create a project, tell the people what to do and how to do it, and afterwards leave, thinking that it will turn out fine, are the ones that don't make it to the end of the lifetime. Because when you do something this big and so locally, it needs to feel like it is a project of the people there, so that they will feel pride and feel the benefits of taking care of such a project. So when we evaluate these things, we're going to decide whether there is a business plan or not. And for certain reasons, when there are infractions on the land of the law, or when the local community is vastly against the idea, for example, we could choose not to continue with the business plan. But when there is a business plan, we go to the project phase, which is the funding, finding the right partners and the right buyers for the project, for the carbon credits forthcoming of it. We start to work on the project development. So we start mapping everything with drones, try to find the suppliers, find the right species, find the right organics to enrich the ground with, and of course the people that are going to implement it. And parallel to that, we are doing the certification. So that means building all the documents that are needed to do such a project. So when everything is in order and we have actually implemented a project, that's where we go to the crediting phase, which is always also the impact phase. The forest starts growing from this bare soil to the pioneers, following natural succession, creating more carbon sequestration, creating more soil improvements, water retainment, better microclimate. And that's when we continuously monitor and take care of this forest so that we can commercialize the impact that is coming from it to support the farmers in this job. So when we look at a certification timeline, there is a lot of things that are happening. So to certify anything, it is just very important that you get your documentation right. It is a process, and it's also, of course, a very official process. So you need to be sure that everything that you claim that you want to get certified, you can prove and support, and actually show people that it is happening. This is something that has been difficult in the past as well. There were certain cases where people would invest in a forest that would never have been planted, or there will be a case of double accounting, saying I go to company A, telling them I've got a great project for them where they can be responsible for the planting of 100 hectares of trees. And then I would go to company B as soon as the project was planted and tell them, well, I've got this great project of 100 hectares, We've already planted the trees, so now we're sequestering carbon, and that I could sell to you. So to protect ourselves from those kind of carbon cowboys, certification has become an increasingly more important role. So that is, of course, why we are very keen on certifying everything that we do. So when we start the certification timeline, the first thing that we do is make a product design document. So what that means is follow the template of Verra in this case, and answering all the questions. And this actually helps development of the project as well, because there are certain criteria that you're going to need to think about. Am I not using invasive species? Do I not disturb the soil too much with plowing, for example? Are there wetlands that I need to take into account? In what way is the soil degraded? So it actually forces you to improve your project. And of course, there's also a big social part in which you have to show that there's ongoing communication and engagement with the community. So when this has been written, it goes up for a 30-day public comment. So in this time, it is on the registry of Verra, and people can read it and comment on it if they maybe agree or have questions about certain parts of the document. When you get out of the public comments and you have your project implemented, that's when we go to the third party, which is the VVB, or the validation and verification body audit. So this is a third party that is standing between us and Verra, and they are going to check whether we are eligible for all the criteria of the actual standard. So this happens in two ways. They're going to look at all the documentation of the project, and normally they would also visit to see if you actually did what you say. Well, due to COVID, this has been a virtual one this year. So we had to document everything with the drone, with camera, and we had a gathering in a local hotel in a town nearby, where they would talk to the neighbors, talk to the farmers, talk to the workers, to hear their stories and how they perceived it. So this was for us a bit of a almost scary part at the beginning, because you don't know what to expect. But the good thing about doing these kind of projects, is that everyone wants the same thing. We want to have good projects that will be good for the people there, that will sequester carbon. So you're actually on the same side of the table, trying to make something that can, withstand scrutiny from anyone, and withstand the lifetime that it should have. So after this validation, after this audit, they will write a report, which you will have to improve. They will have comments, suggestions. They can ask about clarifications or underpinnings that you need to provide. And after that, there will be a final PDD. This final PDD then will go to Verra to actually be eligible for the validation. So it's a lot of steps. There are even some steps in between that I'm not getting into now, but maybe someone has a question about this process.
Actually, I have a question. Like, how long did it take you until actually when you started the PDD writing until you got the Verra registration on final, let's say, validation of the project?
Yeah. So we try to go from writing the PDD to the validation to get it within 1 year. So all the documentation is being done in the same time we do the development. Then we have the planting season, and we end it with the audit. And after that, there's some back and forth, and it also really depends on Verra's timeline as well, and the timeline of the VVB. So you should think of half a year of documentation before the planting, then we have the audit, and then it takes another 4 months to get that back and forth and to be accepted on the registry.
And when does the planting start? So you start the PDD, you start the project, and then you start the planting, right? It's almost like simultaneously.
Yeah, we do it simultaneously because it, as I said, when you do this parallel, it also makes you think of how do I improve my project, and are there any criteria that I'm or thresholds that I'm not going over. So for us, it seems logical to do it at the same time. However, you could write it after the planting even. If you are aware of all the criteria and you're very certain that your project is eligible, you could take the risk and do the documentation after. However, now that we're expanding our project in the same area, it is 20 and 30 kilometers from the first project, there are a lot of similar factors. It's the same culture, same biome, same soil, same supply chain. So that makes it possible to move a lot faster and to not be fooled by the same mistakes that we made in the first project.
You're talking now about the next project, right? So the one which is you're studying now, or like, so, or you have some kind of, you had a pilot project before, like what's the?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
So you're talking about the second project which you're studying now, like the one which you will expand the first one, or it was yeah, okay.
So that is up until the validation part. So when you're validated, then we know that our expectations of what the project is going to sequester is going to do. We know that we are eligible. We know that we have met all the criteria, have not done anything wrong according to the standard. So at this point, we can breathe a bit because now we have to let nature do its work. So the forest starts to grow and we monitor continuously. So we use people on the ground that will look out for droughts, sickness, pest, disease, fires, of course. And we keep watching through a satellite to see if anything changes. But every 3 or 5 years, we are going to do a verification event, which means that we're going to check whether our carbon predictions or projections actually are living up to or if the real situation is living up to our expectations. So at this point, we're going to measure certain plots in the forest. And we are using various measurements. We are training algorithms with satellites and going to do so with drone also eventually. But the important thing is, and it's good that you have some background knowledge about this as well. But the important thing is that you need to feed this with actual data from the ground, because otherwise it could show a correlation, but it's not grounded on your actual measurements. So to train the model and to make it more precise and to be able in the future to actually, with some more certainty, tell something about the sequestration rate, you need to do the measurements on the ground as well. So when we do those measurements, we're going to calculate how much carbon we have sequestrated, and then this will be audited again by the VVB. And I see that I actually forgot the step. So they will do another audit and do the measurements and see if they are close enough together to verify that our calculations are the right calculations. So this in turn goes to Verra again, who needs to see if the VFB did a good job. And when then this is the case, and I say, well, you said you were going to sequester 100,000 tons of carbon, and we see that from the measurements it's 110 or it's 100, or maybe it's even a bit more, 100, or maybe it's a bit less, it's 90. Then that's the amount that you're going to issue, and that is the issuance event when the emission removals are actually verified. So they go from being planned, which is at validation, to being actual, tangible, existing emission removals. And this is, of course, an important point for buyers, because they will see at this point if the project delivers what we thought it would deliver. And of course, now the emission removals are without risk. So let's say we predict 100,000 at validation, but it's 5 years of drought, and it's 80 times, it's only 80. Then of course there's less than we thought there was. But let's say that a company already accounts for less, then the ERs that are verified are without risk and can thus also be sold for a higher price. So by calculating this, there's always a buffer pool from Verra. So they look at the risk of your projects, they look at internal, external, and natural risks, and they will tell you how much of your actual sequestration you can sell, and what that or predict. And there's always a minimum of 10% to be sure that you don't sell or predict in advance too much, as there is. So does anyone have a question about the verification and issuance?
What was the, let's say, the budget for this, like you planned, and what was the actual budget in the end of the day?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
What was your kind of, what was the budget for the verification that you planned, and in the end of the day, how much did it cost?
The planting.
The verification and
Verification. So verification only happens in 3 to 5 years, but it is around the same. But for a VV, so the third party costs for a VVB are likely to be between 20 and 40,000 euros, depending on the location, size of the project, whether it's mixed projects. So that will be for example, a validation event, and for verification it will be more or less the same.
okay.
And then there are also costs at issuance. So when you are converting the carbon credit, so to say, from planned emission reductions to verified emission reductions, there is a issuance fee as well for the registry, but that's very small. That's about 10 cents per ER.
And how do you like finance it? Do you already have some off-takers who buy the future carbon credits?
Yeah, so at this point, we always say we're not married to one model. So it is really fast changing market, and you see different types of investors, of buyers entering every year. And also there are buyers that become much more sophisticated. So interests shift, and so we're being very flexible as well. What we see in mid-market is that people just want to buy, and they will be fine if it's planned or if it's already verified. They just want to participate by buying credits. However, when we look at reseller markets and corporates, things can change. They might be interested to finance the entirety of the project. So then you're going to make agreements on risk, on pricing, on development, different responsibilities. And of course, between those, there's always a lot that can be possible. Repayment in credits, benefit splits, trenches. So we always try and look at what is the best way to make a project happen. Because at the end, that is our goal, to make a project happen, whether it's by selling in advance or making agreements for future credits, or inviting people to finance and to maybe speculate even on what it's going to do. Most importantly is that these trees are being planted.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
I have a question. So you have you are saying the future credits. What's the time lag between the tree and the carbon credits when you can carbon credits?
Yeah. So that depends really on the size of the project and on the type of the project. So for reforestation, because in the beginning, a verification event is very expensive, and in the beginning it's hard to measure also. So let's say after 4 or 5 years, you will have some tree growth. You will have some trees that will actually be measurable. So first one will be 4 or 5 years. But if you have a really big project, maybe you want to do it in 3 years because you can discount the costs over more area. But when the forest gets into puberty, so to say, it will also grow faster, sequester more carbon. The curve will become a bit steeper. So then it might be possible to do a bit more often, maybe every 3 years or 2 years. But that depends on the agreements that you have and also the profile that you have.
And another question, maybe we'll touch on that later, but we all see so many news stories about forests being on fire and all of that stuff. So how do you account? Is there insurance market that is, I don't know, growing with this as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, good question, because this is our biggest fear. I think that one of our forests burned down, but unfortunately, it is very, 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 very expensive to insure for natural disasters, because it is a force majeure. It's out of everyone's hand, and due to the climate crisis, I think it will become more and more expensive because it will become more likely every year that we continue down this road. So what we do is in our project design, hedge for that risk. So we try to fence with spacing between our project and other areas. And also there is an insurance effect in planting biodiverse forest. So there are some, when you have different types of trees, it will actually slow the fires down. And some species are actually more adept to fires than others. So when you have a lot of different species, then the forest will be able to recuperate much better and be have less risk of fire. But also we build a buffer. So a part of the income will be reserved for these kind of problems. And we keep the money up until the part that we can restore the forest for, I believe, 70 or 80%. And then there will always be a way of financing the last 20 or 30% that will be needed to replant the forest.
Also, as I know, actually, the fire doesn't really fully burn down the forest. It normally, depending on the intensity, it could be and type of fire, it could be 5 to 10% of the biomass lost, mainly leaves and branches, but not the stems. Normally they stay, and the roots they stay, and the trees then recover most of the time. It doesn't mean that it destroys completely.
Do you lose the, I don't know, if your forest burned down, even if you know that in 3 years it will grow back? itself on its own, do you lose the ability to sell the carbon credits for those 3 years?
Sorry,
Like,
could you repeat?
do you have to inform Verra or whoever else that your forest, burned down? And do you lose the ability to sell the carbon credits for the time when the forest?
Yeah.
Uh,
No, absolutely. You have to inform Verra. You have to inform your buyers as well. But at the end, if something happens, you know that everyone has done everything to prevent it. So it is a terrible, terrible loss. But it does not mean that we would have to repay, for example, the people that have invested in forest for the first 10 years. Also, this buffer pool that Verra accounts with is 10% for every project. So that means if 10% of, let's say we have 100 projects and they're all same size of Verra, and 10 of them burn down, then it means that there will still be as much carbon credits sold as there is carbon sequestered. So that makes like the lump sum still correct.
And sorry, it might be a silly question, but as a company, so when I purchase offset, do I purchase in advance for the for something that will be produced or something that has been produced in the past already, to have this insurance that it's been done already?
Yeah. No, that is the question. There are people that are willing to that want to that don't care. There are also people that only want verified ERs because it has no risk. But because it has no risk, of course, it is for a higher price as well. And there are also people that, for marketing issues, want to be able to say we made this possible, so we finance the start of the project. And then for corporates, there is another motivation, which might be the biggest motivation, is to hedge for future market circumstances. So in the coming 5 years, we expect to have a huge increase in demand, which will also make sure the prices go up. So there are a lot of companies that are now investing in projects early on, very large scale, to hedge for either the too much price increase or even the option to supply themselves overall.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're now preparing to do our next project. So it's in the neighborhood, well, more or less the same region as the last project, and we're going to do another 1,200 hectares. So now we're working on getting everything in order, getting the supply chain. We're actually setting up our own supply chain at this moment, because we use a lot of native trees, but also trees that would normally not have commercial value, but do have a lot of ecosystem value. But of course, these are hard to get because nobody is normally interested in those. So another way to add a model for the local people, collecting seeds, growing seedlings that we can use in our projects and expand in the region. So that is everything I had prepared to tell you. So I'm open to discuss anything. If you have any questions or have questions about something I didn't tell. And lastly, what you're looking at, this tree is the alienesque Araucaria. So this tree is almost 50 meters high. Sequesters a lot of carbon, but also is one of the most iconic trees of the Atlantic forest. Loved by birds and monkeys that house in there, and one that is critically endangered. because it was very usable for construction. So now we're reintroducing this and planted almost 20,000 of the species in our last project.
Sorry if I missed that. How long have you been doing that? When did you start as a company?
2.5 years ago. And we've been working on this project for the last 2 years.
Thank you.
How much of the time you spent in Brazil?
Well, less than I wanted to because of COVID. I was there doing the research for a month when we had to evacuate the country, which made our work a lot more difficult. Luckily, we had almost all data that we needed to work on the documentation, and we could find solutions to do some things remote. But of course, had to go back as soon as possible again. And then beginning of this year, I was there for 3 months preparing and doing the implementation of the project, which ended in May.
From the analysis of your, I don't know, of other companies that play in the space, where are the majority of the projects like this? Which, I don't know, countries or continents?
Yeah, so what we see is that the project developers, the ones I know, are mainly from Europe. But of course, Europe is not the best climate to do carbon projects, and that's for a couple of reasons. First is the climate. Trees grow faster when it's warmer, but also because land is very expensive in Europe, especially in the Netherlands. We're about the size of a stamp, so we're fighting over every square meter. And then comes labor and equipment. It all brings up the price. So I know of a reforestation project in Germany that was costing 70 euros per ton sequestered. So that's about more than 5 times as much, almost 5 times as much as we're asking for our project. Some people like to do it because it's local, but if you want to do something large scale, make more impact, I think this is why the focused areas are mainly East Asia, so Indonesia a lot, South Africa, and South America.
I tried to purchase some carbon actually at the Green Branch website, so I'm
Great.
proudly,
Thank
yes.
you.
I received the confirmation that there will be carbon credits, right? But they will be later, right? When they're already, so now they're not issued yet, so right?
Yes,
and
that's
after
true.
they issued and verified, how will I receive it? Will you offset it for me, like retire it on my name, or like how this thing
Yeah.
works?
No, exactly. We have, of course, an account in the registry, and we do not expect every buyer to have that, because that will cost you probably a lot more than you would spend on the credit itself. So when they're verified, we keep a registry, which is checked, of course, also through a third-party accountant. And then when they're verified, we issue them in your name, and you will, of course, receive an update on that and the proof that it has been done.
So this will be happening roughly next year, right? In when you have a first verification, or maybe in 3.
No, first verification for this project will be in 24, I think, 23 or 24, after 3 years.
Okay, good. Another question, actually, I looked at the PDD and the carbon curve looks flat there.
Yeah.
But you just mentioned that you have a steep curve, so the trees go slower then faster. Like, how does this all this flat curve also use conservation? Like, how does this work?
What might surprise you is that the Verra or actually the CDM methodology for reforestation project are focused on plantations. So for eucalyptus, we will I could tell you in any region for any species of eucalyptus what the annual increment will be per year. So for these kind of researches, it is very easy to make an exact calculation of the growth. However, we are planting a highly biodiverse forest with different functional species, different cycles. So a lot of pioneers, but also a lot of climax and everything in between as well. Nitrogen absorbers. So what we know is that for this growth, the line is much flatter because it is cycles that are alternating. So the pioneers only live for around, well, we have species of 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, and so on. So it is, so they all have their own cycle, and they take over. So it is a lot flatter. However, for us, it is at this moment completely flat because there is very little research that has been done about carbon sequestration rates of natural forest for this region and this biome. So what we have done is with this knowledge, determine what would be the minimum average sequestration rate. So what we expect actually is that at some time it will be more than this, but of course to be safe and not to make to create liabilities vis-a-vis our buyers and investors, we use the low estimate to be certain that we can deliver.
Okay, and I see now. And also you mentioned that the 50% of the carbon revenues will be shared with the local communities and partners.
Yeah.
How exactly will happen? Will there be some jobs created, or it will be just some, I don't know, some public funding distributed like to the local communities? How do you plan this part later? I mean, of course, now they plant trees, they get paid, but later there will be carbon revenues and maybe just a few conservation work like fire protection. How do you actually distribute the funding?
Yeah. So almost all the money we invest is locally. Of course, we have our own people in to be paid, and for example, the VVB in Verra, but all the labor, all the equipment, the whole supply chain is very local. So we invest almost all the money locally, which of course goes to the local community. But the landowners are actually paid per carbon credit. So during this phase, they get a minimum compensation, but when there is a higher sequestration or we sell for a higher price, their profit grows as well. And for us, this is important because the landowner should feel a part of this carbon market, should feel part of the project. And when your situation is better, then he should improve as well. And we're hoping that in 2 years, when these prices are going to rise, this will wake up more and more farmers thinking, okay, so it is beneficial and we see a growing market, so that they will be enthusiastic to convert parts of their farm as well.
Are there any tribes or indigenous people living in the same area who also get?
In this area, not. We have some very local people, so to say, people whose families have been living there for 5-6 generations. But unfortunately, this area, as a large part of the south of Brazil, is renowned for having scared or otherwise got rid of the indigenous people 150 years ago already.
Okay, there is a question also from the Zoom participant, Roman. What is the, I mean, can you repeat please, what is the duration like of the verification of your like carbon stocks? Is it like every 5 years, or like will you change it later to like more frequent?
So we're going to do first verification after 3 years, so the 4th year, so to say, when we start the 4th year, or maybe even a year later, depending on what our measurements are. because as I said, verification is expensive, so you have to make a cost benefit analysis to see if it's the right timing. But as the forest starts growing, we could do it more often, every 2 or 3 years, because there will be a higher carbon stock probably. And also, when we do more projects in the area, we're going to make a grouped project, which means that under the same circumstances, projects can be added to the same project. Areas can be added to the same project. So when you have a very large area, you can divide the costs of the audit among that, and then it might be so that you can even do it every year. There are some very large projects that even do it every half year.
Thanks. I think you answered it. Also, my question is if like to a startup founder, how did you fund it from the beginning? Like, what was did you use your own seed funding, or you got somebody already backing you up, some companies? How did you bootstrap?
So we were very lucky in the beginning because we had someone advising us who was initially going to help us find an investor. And at one point, I think it was the third or fourth meeting, he said, well, since I've been helping you, I've become really interested myself and want to invest. And also he already had someone who wanted to co-invest with him. So I think we had a very lucky seed round, which enabled us to work on this project for the first year until we started to raise money for the actual implementation of the project. So the actual implementation was done by private investors that were investing their own money. So social people that wanted to create some impact. So everything has been done by us up until this point. For next project, we're looking at different models, trying to include crowdfunding, including maybe a model where the buyer also invests something at the beginning, some funds that we are approaching. So in the end, when we're doing bigger and bigger projects, we're really going to look at blended finance. So trying to find 5 or 6 different paths and see for every project how we can reach the best, the optimum way of financing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And there's another question from the Zoom. You mentioned that in your PDD there is a section on the biodiversity, right? Or like, I mean, is there any like the biodiversity? Is a question like, is there any biodiversity section in the PDD implementation, and how do you approach this biodiversity in general?
Yeah, so there is a part about biodiversity in the PDD. However, it is more elaborate when you are doing the CCB, the Climate Community and Biodiversity certification as well. They need to elaborate on that more. But for us, because we plant so much biodiverse species, we also include in our planting strategy. So where we explain what are we going to plant and what methods we're using, a list of the species and showing that they're local, non-invasive, whether they are endangered or not, is can all be found in PDD. However, the PDD that is online now is still an old version, which we have greatly improved when you think of biodiversity.
Oh, do you mention CCB? Do you plan to go for CCB as well?
I'm sorry?
Do you plan to go for CCB certification as well?
Yeah, absolutely. For this one, we chose not to because we are also pilot partners of Landskill. Landskill is a new type of certification spearheaded by the Verra, the Rainforest Alliance, and the CCBA, the Climate Community and Biodiversity Alliance. And Landscale is focused on assessing impact, environmental, social, climate impact on a landscape level. So also looking outside the boundaries of your own project. What co-benefits are there? Are we improving microclimate? Are we improving water retainment in the catchment, for example? So this is what we use for the first one. But since it's still in development and also new, we are going to do CCB for the next one as well, to have a more recognizable and short-term improvement.
Yeah. Oh, actually, yes. I'll have to look at this. Thank you. Point out. Any other question?
I have another question about the stakeholder engagement. So when you started the project, you maybe share a little bit more about how you engage with local communities, and maybe about the farmers.
I'm sorry, I cannot understand the question. Could you maybe move a bit closer?
Yeah, I was just curious about the stakeholder, about the engagement with local communities when you started the project. How did you persuade them that this is something worthy of, I don't know, them leasing land to you, and who were the main groups that you have engaged with? Like, can you just walk through a little bit of a, I don't know, initial phase?
Definitely. So again, it starts well at the center, which is the project itself. So fortunately, we had a landowner that was in the personal circle of one of our investors that we could persuade to do the project. What he mentioned in the beginning was that they could really feel a climate crisis, that they could really see their lands degrading, yielding less and less every year, more droughts, less predictive weather. So for them, what we told them, and they are a bit higher educated, it resonated. It was familiar for them as well. So then we go without and also there's already people working on the land, but also of course you have neighbors, people living in the area, and outside that you even have a lot more stakeholders. We also include natural stakeholders as biodiversity and the soil, for example. But first it's about identifying, seeing who's got certain powers, who's got certain influences, what are the needs of everyone, how do they perceive these kinds of projects, and then really go on with the stakeholder consultation, talking to people, explaining to people what to do, listening, trying to learn from their experience. And when this has happened, you have a good idea of how the project is perceived and whether it has a chance of expanding as well. And you will find always people that don't agree. You have people that really live there and really face the consequence of climate crisis, but there's also large areas or large farms where people don't even live. It is a landowner that has rented out their farm for eucalyptus, for example, which means that for 7 or 8 years there will be one person checking a month. So almost no people living there, and they could not care less, for example, that other soils of other people are deteriorating. So and after keep being engaged, keep talking to people, listen if there's any difficulties, and create events so that it starts living amongst them and they start to feel like they're involved as well.
Right. Thank you for the presentation. Reforestation projects are usually in areas which are economically and politically often are not most stable countries. Your all projects are in Brazil, or if not, do you plan to diversify, or are you diversifying at the moment? Do you feel safe, like protected by Brazil law with your project, that nothing will happen you won't be deprived of what you've got there. And those countries are usually quite high on corruption ratings as well. Do you have to face it, or have you faced it? How do you handle that?
Yeah, no. So we have a corruption department within the Green Branch that pays off the costs. No, I'm kidding. So in Brazil, this is a huge problem. But Brazil is so big that there are a lot of different political climates within the country as well. When we go to the north, there's a lot of dispute over land rights, for example. In the area where we work, there's almost none. So this is a huge improvement when you look at the north, because the problem there is that all this deforestation happens because people have no idea who the land belongs to. So that's a plus. We are being supported by the government's environmental programs, because what people don't know actually is that although land right disputes might be very common, and Brazil has the highest rate of lawyers per inhabitants, but that the environmental regulations are actually very well developed. But the problem is that it differs per president, for example, how strict it is being upheld. And this is the problem for the last switches of power, that there are some people that want to reinforce it really badly and other ones that just care less, which gives more room for things to go wrong. But the important thing is, and this is again including the local community, because if they want the project to survive, then it will. You know, if things start to lack and they think, well, we could be better off another way, that's when things normally go south.
And actually, this is a question to it as well from Roman from the Zoom chat. Like, is there such a thing in Brazil that you have a special purpose, let's say, for every land piece? Some that, for example, should be just only forest, and some that should be, let's say, agricultural land. And if it's agricultural land, is it allowed to grow forest there, or you need to convert the land, or how do you treat this kind of land usage, purpose?
No, Roman is absolutely right. There, the forest code, it's called in Brazil, and it is it consists of three areas mostly. It is the legal reserve, which means that per biome there is a percentage that you cannot use. In the Amazon, you can only use 20% of your land. Where we are, you can use 80% of land. In the Cerrado biome, you can use 65% of your land, and the rest must be native forest. Then there is the APP, which is the area of permanent preservation, which means that, and it's slightly different from your legal reserve, because this, for example, is a river that needs to have forest on both sides, and depending on how much water goes through the river, it should be wider. Or, for example, hillsides that are too steep, that could erode, they have to have forests. So this is besides your legal reserve. But there are also areas of permanent preservation that are not forest, but you cannot cultivate anything on it. But you also do not have the obligation to restore that land. So these are areas that are what we call low impact areas, where nothing happens. It's just barren land, and they can't use it for cultivation, but also it would cost money for them to restore it. So this is a good opportunity for those for these kind of projects. And of course, everything we do has to be in line with local regulations, and it has to be approved if we want to plant trees that can be cut later, it should be registered as well. So everything we do, we discuss with them.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, yes. So this probably is not such a similar problem that it is in Russia. Let's say now up to the moment now it's changing, but you couldn't, for example, grow the forest in your agricultural land. So if you have a land, let's say devoted to agriculture, you can only do agriculture there. And if you get, and then if it's started to reforest, then you get a penalty. So you have to cut the forest to continue.
Oh man. Well, when you think of it, it's semantics, because building a forest, natural forest, is in some sense also agriculture, right? It is the production of carbon and the production of ecological values, and also, you know, if you plant some nut trees, for example, there will be an income as well. But that's a shame. Is this law being changed at the moment?
Yeah, that's what yes, it's changing now, but they're still debating about the way it's going to change.
Yeah.
And maybe they argue that you can grow a forest, but then after 10 years or 20 years, you need to cut it down again to convert, like to return the land into the agricultural cultivation again. So it's like those things are not yet certain, and this makes it a bit weird in Russia. But I think they all understand now the need for the kind of carbon sequestration and on the private land, because there are forests in Russia, but they're all federal lands, and it's like it's a federal program to restore, like the reforest, and mainly from the big loggers. So like when you say doing forestry, you have to also to restore the forest that you in equal size. But for the agricultural land, it's still like a bit weird now, but this probably will be changed in like soon.
Hopefully, let's hope so.
Is that a question?
One more question. Is there any plans for you to use at the end of the cycle to use wood for commercial purposes? I mean, what's going to happen when the forest matures?
Yeah. So when the forestry matures, there's two ways we can go about it. Or we're going to develop sustainable ways to get an income from the forest, so we already plant certain native trees that after we could harvest, but it should not be cutting down the whole forest. It should be extracting maybe 5 trees per hectare in a sustainable way, and then regrow again. So that could be one of the reasons. But also we're really hoping that a forest will be worth more in 30 years than it is worth now, and that we can extend the period, because after 30 years our forest will still be sequestering carbon. You know, we'll have the algae that will only mature when it's 50 or 60 years old. So, and of course there will come more organic parts in the soil as well. So at that point we're hoping to either extend or find with carbon, or find additional ways that will not harm the forest or the carbon stock.
But I forgot to ask you, the soil carbon, like how do you measure the soil carbon? Do you also include it to the calculation of the total carbon sequestration?
Yes, we do. Yeah. So you start with the baseline, and then we measure how much it's going to go up. So what we had was a very degraded land. It was steep, it was dry, it was barren, a lot of cattle that ruined it, a lot of erosion. So what we're hoping to see, and what we're expecting to see, of course, is that these values are going to rise, and that there's going to be more organic matter in the soil.
And how did you model the future kind of carbon sequestration for the soil carbon? Do you use any like local models or like local?
Yeah. So at this moment, it's a default model, because you don't know exactly what it's going to be, and it's important to have a good baseline. So the how degraded is the land, and in that you also account for erosion, for example.
So did you make samples of the land already in that area that you make a project? And okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question from Roman. Like, but I mean, probably it's not yet the case. But for you, for the 2 years, I mean, did you? So when did you plant the trees? It was this year or the previous, or the last year?
This year.
This year. So they're still not yet, not yet grown.
No. It is going fast when it's spring, but at this point it's mainly the cover crops and so very small seedlings. So when, of course, it's winter now in Brazil. So when spring is coming, then everything will shoot out of the ground, and we're expecting it to be at least to the waist or to the shoulder almost by the end of the year.
And then like what was your like actual carbon versus the plant, right? So
Yeah,
hopefully
exactly.
more.
And we do a verification event every 3, 4, 5 years, but we ourselves we measure every year. We try to collect more data, try and feed it to the algorithm to work on our own models. If we're expanding the project, of course, after 5 years, we're going to plant it in 5 years, then we will know exactly the growth rate of the first 5 years.
Okay, and you also mentioned you will use some remote sensing, like a satellite data. Like, what exactly are you gonna use? Like, how will you approach this? Like, use the I don't know, Sentinel-2 data and some more detailed.
No, exactly. Sentinel-2. As I said, we are going to use 3 levels, so ground, drone, and satellite. And it's just important to keep feeding information to the system, to keep improving our measurements, so that next time you can actually use it to make better projections and to make a better baseline, for example. But the key is doing frequent and well-organized measurements.
How do you use drones now? What is they used for? What type of monitoring you do with drones now?
So with the drones, at this moment, they are used for checks, and they're used for mapping. Because we do not yet have any growth. So in 1 year, we're going to have a drone with a LiDAR system and a hyperspectral camera to measure the forest that is then growing, sequestering carbon.
Oh, yeah, makes sense. But, so I think we're already out of time, and actually I think with this there are no more questions. So I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And it was really fun to talk to you all. And I hope you'll have a great evening. Probably have some drinks at the end of these very interesting 3 days. It was my pleasure to talk to you. You can always approach me on LinkedIn or as Sergey for my information if you have any more questions or have interest in some things we talked about. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thanks, Kasper. We will, and hope you will come one day to Perm for the summer school.
I hope so as well. Absolutely.
So keep
Thank you.
it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.